Hello everyone, in this video we're going to cover the questions asked by the ABC moderators in the Trump and Kamala debate. We're not going to cover any of the individual fact-checking that took place in between rounds or anything, because I do think most people would agree that that was pretty biased in Kamala's favor. But even if you don't agree with that, I guess, whatever. We're going to cover every question one by one. We're going to decide if the question asked was negative to Trump, negative to Kamala, or neutral, and then we'll add them up at the end. So let's start with question number one.
To a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
So on my scoreboard, which I'll show at the end, I'm going to chalk that one up as neutral. CNN actually asked that question in a lot more negative way towards, at the time, Biden, where they said home prices are up 40%, the price of these stuff is up 20%, 30% or whatever. I'd say that ABC did a pretty neutral job. The question wasn't terrible on its face, but it wasn't necessarily harsh. It was just sort of the economy and are people better off? I left Kamala's beginning of the answer in there because that's such a funny way to start that question off. I grew up as a middle-class kid, but let's go to the next question.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this, because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices.
So that is clearly a negative question towards Trump. So the economy basically has two questions so far. The question towards Kamala Harris was, are people better off? And then just float that question out to her. She can do whatever she wants with it. This question to Trump, this guy, David Muir, rattles off this 15-second speech, debates for Kamala Harris, saying, oh, Kamala Harris thinks this, says it's going to increase the price by $4,000, blah, 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 and can Americans afford higher prices? That is clearly a very negative and loaded question towards Donald Trump. So we have one neutral, one negative to Trump. Let's see the next one.
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban, because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
And so again, this question has to be viewed, I think, as clearly negative toward Trump. You want to talk about abortion? Fine, just ask a question about abortion. Instead, Lindsay Davis, the other ABC moderator here, spends 20 seconds saying, Donald Trump, you flip-flop. You said this. Now you said this. Why should people trust you? She even says, what's the point of saying Kamala Harris has said that people should not trust you? Kamala's right there. Why not just let Kamala make the case? So clearly, again, a negative framing of a question towards Donald Trump.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if you did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with...
And so I'm going to include that little follow-up question. I don't think that was necessarily a planned question, but I'm definitely going to chalk that one up to being negative to Trump as well. She's following up. I don't necessarily know why she even needs or feels the need to jump in there. But the other thing, she's saying, oh, Donald Trump, you said this, but your running mate, J.D. Vance, said this. Just saying that to create some kind of division, I think that has to be framed as a negative question towards Donald Trump.
Justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies.
I'm going to actually need to include a new category in my list, positive questions to Kamala, because the Lindsay Davis, the moderator there, just said, hey, Kamala, respond however you want to. That's like the biggest softball there is. Her question to Trump was loaded. She spent 20 seconds talking about it. Then when she asked the same, or she had the same topic, at least abortion, to Kamala, it's just, hey, Kamala, respond. So I'm going to add one to the positive Kamala category.
With a baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has.
So I would say that question actually is reasonably fair and reasonably tough towards Kamala. I chalked that one up to a negative question for Kamala. The first one, basically asking, like, why did you wait till just 6 months ago to start kind of like taking this more seriously? And President Biden did task you with this job in immigration. So I would say negative to Kamala.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier. So let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah.
I think there perhaps is a way to ask that in a more neutral way. The fact that he had to add the will authorities be going door to door in this country clearly comes from a loaded place. Clearly, he's basically making the position that either him or the network just too completely opposes to the idea of Trump's deportation policy. I'm not even making a stance personally on it, but I would say that is a negative framing of a question. You could ask that, in my opinion, in a much more neutral way while still bringing the topic up. So negative to Trump.
Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of the.
I am going to include this as a negative question towards Kamala because at a very minimum, that question does let voters know at home that Kamala has flip-flopped on all these different issues. But when you ask the question like that, you say, you flip-flopped on this, you flip-flopped on this, and flip-flopped on this, have your values changed? It sort of gives you a get out of jail free card on all of the issues because you don't have to address any of them specifically. I think that question could have been a lot more tough and probably a lot more useful if she just focused, say, on the fracking part. You said you bet we're going to ban fracking. It's very important to Pennsylvania. And now you say you're for it. Can you explain that? Did you have a sudden change of heart? Did you see some data that made you change your mind? Do you still care about the environment or the pro kind of climate change people? What are you going to say to them? That would have been, I think, a way better question. The way this is kind of said makes it to be, I think, quite easy for Kamala to just kind of address everything all at once and give some kind of generic sort of answer. But I still will chalk that up as a negative question to Kamala.
These are not good things for the environment, as she understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said.
I guess you have to ask that just for the odd person maybe that's watching this who's been totally clued out of politics for 4 years and has not seen the fact that this has been covered so much for the last 4 years. I mean, this issue has been litigated in public so many times. I I guess you still have to ask it. I just still would say that's definitely a negative question to Trump, the way that that's all framed. And I mean, most people I think don't think that January 6th was good in any way, shape, or form. But I still think you have to say that as a negative question towards Donald Trump. They chose to ask the question. They chose to frame it in that way. And again, they chose to load it with all the like commentary by David Muir. You said this, blah, 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 blah. This happened, blah, 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 blah. 2 hours passed. So I would say for sure, negative question to Trump.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically. You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it.
And this middle of the debate part, I think this was the part of the debate that showed ABC's bias the most. There was basically like a 40-minute chunk when I was watching this debate where I was just like, what is happening? All these questions are so anti-Trump. And by the way, Trump is not the incumbent. If you watch this, you would definitely think Donald Trump and not Kamala Harris / Joe Biden was the incumbent. These questions all coming at him all at once sound like the questions that would be coming from a sitting president. So the fact that you got to ask back to back January 6th and the 2020 election, I think those two things, at least the way that they're covered, they're very related in terms of the themes that come up with both of them along the lines, kind of what he said about the peaceful transfer of power and what have you. I mean, clearly a negative question towards Donald Trump. To be honest, I don't know that you need to bring up both of those as separate questions in an hour and 30-minute debate. I think those should have been tangled into one question. Still fair things to bring up, but now you're spending a huge portion of this debate talking about this, more so than you talked about the economy, which is actually so deeply unfair to anybody that does not own a home or anybody struggling, anybody living paycheck to paycheck. That matters 300 times more than these two questions. Even though they matter lots to the political class, and they do matter, that those questions should have been wrapped up into one, in my opinion.
David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was...
ABC should be completely ashamed of themselves. There's most of the country living paycheck to paycheck. There's serious issues. There's tons of inflation. There is, as Donald Trump brings up way too many times during this debate, it's still real though, there is an immigration crisis. 3 questions in a row. And this question is to Kamala, clearly a negative question to Trump. This is like the biggest softball in history. They're spending the middle of this debate, probably over 30 minutes, on the same topic. That is such a softball to Kamala. Hey, Donald Trump said and did all this bad stuff, and we just talked about it for 2 questions. Here, I'm going to have a slightly different angle, and then here's an opportunity for you to just keep talking about how bad Donald Trump is. This is a complete disgrace to journalism. ABC should be completely like this. Actually, watching this back is pretty frustrating.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
So if the roles were reversed and it was Donald Trump in office saying that, I 1,000% believe they would have come at him way harder. However, still reasonably difficult of a question. I mean, I don't know how well she answered it, but I'm not going to play that part. But I'll say negative to Kamala. It could be more negative for sure, and I certainly believe that if it was Donald Trump and the roles were reversed, it would have been much more harsh, but I'll still chalk that up to a negative question to Kamala.
Turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop.
Again, completely shameful job here by David Muir. So much commentary baked in to that question. You say you're going to stop the war in 24 hours, but some top official, whatever, says that Russia will be emboldened to come into more countries. I mean, you're lowering that thing up so much, and then you don't even ask the question. Just ask the question about, you could say, Donald Trump, what are you going to do with Russia, Ukraine? That would be a fair way to ask that. Instead, it's, will you say that you definitely want Ukraine, this country that probably all people in the news media want to win, we definitely want Ukraine to win. Are you going to agree with us on that? Why not just frame it, hey, what would you do about Russia, Ukraine to end the war? Clearly a negative question to Trump. Clearly a ton of bias, and he's clearly, with the way he's framing that, trying to put Trump into a box. Completely shameful question, actually, by David Muir. I think pretty unfair to the people in Russia and Ukraine. Fucking end the war.
And her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care.
Actually, you don't want to ask a bigger question. You just wanted to bring up that recent soundbite of Donald Trump at that National Association of Black Journalists clip. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, Donald Trump has done like 50 interviews. Kamala Harris has done 2 recently. You're going to find way more negative clips of Donald Trump. And obviously he says wild stuff. At least he's out there telling Americans what he thinks and giving you a chance to see him. So this is clearly just a negative question to Trump. Here's some stupid thing you said, and then I'm going to ask like a related question, I guess. But the question, I think, was just clearly just brought up so David Muir could get that shot in about what Donald Trump said at the National Association of Black Journalists event.
She's black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
And so again, I'll have to dust off that positive Kamala question category. That's the question that she gets. He asked Donald Trump this embarrassing question. Hey, comment on this thing you said. Kamala, what do you think? That's the question that he asked. Just, what do you think, Kamala? Nothing difficult. No commentary from him. He could say, what do you think about this? What do you think about your rhetoric, Trump's rhetoric? How does it affect this part of the world? Just, Kamala, what do you think?
What he has
President
said
Trump, this is
multiple
now
times.
your
Yes.
3rd time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health.
Again, I think you have to say that's a negative question towards Donald Trump. She could have said, if she was being honest and fair and straight down the middle, hey, Donald Trump, what's your plan for health care? Instead, she says, you keep saying that you're going to repeal and replace Obamacare, but you failed. And then you said, oh, you have this plan, but what actually is your plan? Clearly a loaded framing, clear the context that she's adding at the beginning, saying, you've said you're going to fix this, but you failed. Why not just ask the question? And again, you're asking these questions to Donald Trump as if he is the incumbent in office. And you're not doing that at all to Kamala. So clearly negative Trump in my opinion, on that question.
To get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well,
and so that's the final question of the debate. Then they give their closing statements, which are not a question, but that would be a neutral question. There was no loading in that. It was just, Trump, you think this, or you've said this about climate change. Kamala Harris, you've said this about climate change. That's how you should have asked the majority of the question. This debate was a complete hackfest. This was actually way worse than I thought, because I knew the fact checking was very selective, which many people have pointed out online. But even watching this back, I did not think that this was going to be so skewed in the choice of the question. So the final tally I have here, which I'm putting up on the screen now, 10 of these questions, by my count, were negative to Donald Trump. 2 of them were neutral questions. 2 questions positive to Kamala. 0 questions positive to Trump, by my count. And again, watch it back if you want. There are certainly questions you can ask that would have been positive to Donald Trump. And if you can't admit that, you just have Trump derangement syndrome. You can ask positive questions to Biden and Kamala too, for sure, if you even just dig a little bit. But for Trump, you could say, there were no new wars started under your presidency. That's a very easy question to ask. You could say that to Kamala. Hey, why did that happen? Like, what's going on with you guys? Why are these conflicts started? You could say, when Donald Trump was in office, he had a relatively strong economy and with low inflation. Kamala, what's up with that? There are certainly a lot of questions that you could ask that would frame Donald Trump in a positive light. Whether you like the guy or not, that's not your job. You're supposed to be a journalist right now. And this was a complete botch job by the entire ABC organization, as far as I'm concerned, as well as Lindsay Davis and David Muir. And then finally, my tally, I'll just pop it up there one more time. 3 questions negative to Kamala. So 10 negative Trump, 3 negative Kamala. 2 positive Kamala, 0 positive Trump, and 2 neutral. Watch this video back if you'd like to. Disagree with me if you want in the comments. But certainly by my count, and I tried to be fair, this was a biased hack job from ABC. So with that said, thank you for watching this video. Have a great day.